This is your daily dose of all things royal.
That this British elite have mastered and been masters of for decades is psychological warfare. The way that they shape narratives.
Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. We're going to go ahead and pick right back up from where we left off a couple days ago. In my previous video, I broke down how the British government created a unit that's still operating today called RICU, otherwise known as the Research, Information, and Communications Unit. Their job is simple: manipulate public opinion and control the narrative, especially when it comes to shaping how people feel about migration and Islam. Now, if you haven't watched that video yet, go back and do that first. It sets up everything we're talking about here, because what we're seeing right now with what has been going on with Harry and Meghan didn't just come out of nowhere. Psychological and political warfare is nothing new for the British. A lot of the same tactics they're using today were already being refined back in 1942. As discussed in part 1 of this, there's one secret document that lays it all out. And the methods line up disturbingly well with what's happening right now, especially when it comes to this duplicitous duo. But we'll get into the potential reasons behind the outrageous things that we witnessed Harry and Meghan get away with and why there were no consequences a little later on. But first, it's important to acknowledge a fundamental reality: that Britain has been running these psychological operations for decades. This is not speculation or theory. It's a documented fact, and the monarchy has long been aware of and involved in past activities. This history helps explain why the UK and the British royal family have invested so heavily in shaping and controlling online narratives. We've covered this in detail in my 2024 Psychological Warfare series, if you choose to revisit. To properly understand what the Harry and Meghan saga is really about, we need to go back to 2016, the year Donald Trump was elected. And the reason why I'm doing this is for everybody to understand how Harry and Meghan came about. I've been saying this now for a few years, that I believe Harry and Meghan are assets of some sort to the deep state for both the US and the UK. Looking back, Trump really threw a wrench into the New World Order these globalists were quietly building, the one we were all sleepwalking into 10 years ago. The Democrats, as well as those unelected bureaucrats, were certain Hillary was going to win and finish the job of hollowing out America. The elitist parasites were blindsided when she lost, especially the globalists in Europe. This came right off the heels of Brexit, and suddenly there was real panic that other countries might follow suit and start taking their sovereignty back. Speaking for myself, back then, I didn't fully understand how the media machine worked or how deep the coordination went between the unelected bureaucrats at the World Economic Forum, the UN, the World Health Organization, NATO, and the influence of the British imperial system that has been negatively oppressing and impacting the lives of people living in democratic countries. They had plans for the world. Socialist plans no citizen in the West ever voted for, that many were too distracted to push back on at the time until it was too late. I think from America's standpoint, we didn't understand that the smooth-talking Barack Obama had been ushering in cultural Marxism. The media, once again, delivered the classic bread and circus distraction. For nearly a decade, the Harry and Meghan saga dominated news cycles around the world, and for the most part, it worked. While the public was absorbed in royal family drama, the real objective was already underway, which was laying the groundwork to sabotage President Trump's first term and prevent him from ever returning to the White House. As I've said before, it was an all-hands-on-deck operation from a global standpoint. That effort included election interference with dark money flowing in from multiple directions and intelligence agencies actively involved in spying on Trump and his campaign. When we rewind and we talk about the start of 2017, When the Meghan Markle saga first exploded, and right out the gate, her alleged half-sister Samantha inserted herself as the supporting act, almost immediately, the race card was played, and the whole feud was framed in a way that deliberately echoed the same attacks being hurled at Donald Trump at the time. What's striking is how Meghan's PR operation and narrative spinning against the royal family operated exactly like a political campaign designed to take out an opponent. It was just as ruthless and just as dirty. And this kind of noise and distraction wasn't just limited to Harry and Meghan on the world stage. The same kind of coordinated distraction was running in parallel with Trump. That's why, in this video today, I want to share something with you. It is a piece written back in 2017 by foreign policy journalist Sharon Weinberger. I think if I read this at the time, I would have skimmed right past it. I didn't yet understand how the media gets weaponized, but now, after everything we've seen together on this journey, I think you'll start to recognize the pattern. So this is what Sharon had to say back in May of 2017 of what she was witnessing and noticing. Says here, background. The Trump administration is suffering under withering information campaigns designed to first undermine, then delegitimize, and ultimately remove the president, possibly confusing these attacks with an elevated interplay of otherwise normal DC partisan infighting and adversarial media relations. The White House response to these campaigns reflects a political advocacy mindset that is intensely reactive, severely under-inclusive, and dangerously inadequate to the threat. If action is not taken to rescope and respond to these hostile campaigns very soon, the administration risks implosion and subsequent early departure from the White House. This is not politics as usual, but rather political warfare at an unprecedented level that is openly engaged in the direct targeting of a seated president through manipulation of the news cycle. It must be recognized on its own terms so that immediate action can be taken. At its core, these campaigns run on multiple lines of effort, serve as the nonviolent line of effort of a wider movement, and execute political warfare agendas that reflect cultural Marxist outcomes. The campaigns operate through narratives because the hard left is aligned with Islamist organizations at local. Antifa working with Muslim Brotherhood, doing business as MSA and CARE. National ACLU and BLM working with CARE and MPAC, and international levels, OIC working with OSCE and the UN. Recognition must be given to the fact that they seamlessly interoperate at the narrative level as well. In candidate Trump, the opposition saw a threat to the quote-unquote politically correct enforcement narratives they've meticulously laid in over the past few decades. In President Trump, they see a latent threat to continue that effort to ruinous effect, and their retaliatory response reflects this fear. Now, at the time, how many people ever heard of Antifa? I think it's only in the recent years, ever since Meghan Markle and her Sussex Squad terrorist group came onto the scene, it was then I recognized that these people are part of this radical leftist cultural Marxist movement. Meghan Markle is a Marxist. On October 13, 2016, during one of Trump's campaign speeches, he says, "The establishment and their media enablers will control over this nation through means that are very well known. Anyone who challenges their control is deemed a sexist, a racist, a xenophobe, and morally deformed."
This election will determine whether we're a free nation or whether we have only the illusion of democracy, but are in fact controlled by a small handful of global special interests rigging the system, and our system is rigged. This is reality. You know it, they know it, I know it, and pretty much the whole world knows it. The establishment and their media enablers wield control over this nation through means that are very well known. Anyone who challenges their control is deemed a sexist, a racist, a xenophobe, and morally deformed. They will attack you. They will slander you. They will seek to destroy your career and your family. They will seek to destroy everything about you, including your reputation. They will lie, 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 and then again, they will do worse than that. They will do whatever's necessary. The Clintons are criminals. Remember that. They're criminals.
This October speech was given a little less than a month ago before the 2016 election. Donald Trump at that time had been falsely accused of sexual assault, and the media was having a field day with it. And the campaign that we saw was this emphasis on him being a misogynist and a racist. Well, guess who pops up 2 weeks later? Ms. Meghan Markle gets vomited onto the global stage as dating Prince Harry. And what do we have a week later? Harry issuing a statement talking about how racist and how misogynistic the press were being about Meghan. Do you now understand how this all aligned with the rise and fall and then the rise again with Donald Trump? This is where this started. Now, this is my opinion, but the date that was chosen to release this statement was calculated and intentional. Buckingham Palace drops this the morning of the U.S. elections before the polls open. The whole world is reading, oh, Harry making this statement because this news went viral. And of course, all the little tropes that are included in there, such as the press being racist, sexist, things that were being said were defamatory by her own alleged sister. You know, you look at this and you say, oh my God, this was working in parallel to the messaging that was going on with Donald Trump. They were calling him the racist. They were calling him the xenophobe. They were calling him the misogynist. So Harry, or whoever behind Harry, was capitalizing on that with, I'm guessing, to influence the generation that they were targeting to vote for Hillary Clinton. Right in the back of your mind, the first thing that you're seeing here is like, oh, poor Meghan. I don't want this in the United States. I'm going to vote for Hillary. And you can see how they psychologically manipulated people here. Now, the big question is, how did this woman being called Meghan Markle got into the close circle of the royal family? And I believe it has something to do with the Clintons. Meghan's companionship with John Fitzpatrick likely opened some door for her. People don't talk about this guy enough. Like, he was one of the very few friends that Meghan invited to the wedding. Make that make sense. So going back to Sharon's writing and how Donald Trump's quote fits in, she writes here, culturally conditioned to limit responses to such attacks as yet another round in the ongoing drone from diversity and multicultural malcontents. These broadsides are discounted as political correctness run amok. However, political correctness is a weapon against reason and critical thinking. This weapon functions as the enforcement mechanism of diversity narratives that seek to implement cultural Marxism. Candidate Trump's rhetoric in the campaign not only cut through the Marxist narrative, he did so in ways that were viscerally comprehensible to a voting bloc that then made candidate Trump the president, making that bloc self-aware in the process. President Trump is either the candidate he ran as or he is nothing. Yeah, I think the UK right now is a perfect example of how this political correctness has been a weapon against not only the people, but also common sense. Recognizing in candidate Trump an existential threat to cultural Marxist memes that dominate the prevailing cultural narrative. Those that benefit recognize the threat he poses and seeks his destruction. Exactly, and I think we all see that now after this fraud has been exposed being committed by the left. In addition, let's not forget a big part of this are those pedophile networks. For this cabal, Trump must be destroyed. Far from politics as usual, this is a political warfare effort that seeks the destruction of a sitting president. Since Trump took office, the situation has intensified to crisis-level proportions. For those engaged in the effort, especially those from within the deep state or permanent government apparatus, this raises clear Title 18 concerns. Again, back in 2016 and 2017, who knew exactly what the deep state was? At that time, it had been so discredited by the left in order to cover all of this stuff up. Now, this next part really explains what we're witnessing today. It says the opposition. While opposition to President Trump manifests itself through political warfare memes centered on cultural Marxist narratives, this hardly means that opposition is limited to Marxists as conventionally understood. Having become the dominant cultural meme, some benefit from it while others are captured by it, including deep state actors, globalists, bankers, Islamists, and establishment Republicans. Though the campaign candidate Trump tapped into a deep vein of concern among many citizens that America is at risk and is slipping away, globalists and Islamists recognize that for their visions to succeed, America, both as an ideal and as a national and political entity, must be destroyed. If you think back 10 years ago, the world was very different compared to what we are witnessing now. Everything that this person is saying here literally has played out. Atomization, meaning removing identity, of society must also occur at the individual level, with attacks directed against all levels of group and personal identity. Hence the sexism, racism, and xenophobia memes. As a Judeo-Christian culture, forced inclusion of postmodern notions of tolerance is designed to induce nihilistic contradictions that reduce all thought, all faith, all loyalties to meaningless. Group rights based on sex or ethnicity are a direct assault on the very idea of individual human rights and natural law around which the Constitution was framed. Transgender acceptance memes attack at the most basic level by denying a person the right to declare the biological fact of one's sex. When a population has 2 + 2 = 5 imposed on it, there are many that benefit. Let's go ahead and talk about those who benefit from all of this. You have the mainstream media. They're the gatekeepers and, the ones who set the narrative, shaping people's worldviews and thoughts. You then have academia, where they're the ones who are cranking out the next gen Marxists and communists. You have the deep state, who see that the successful outcome of cultural Marxism is a bureaucratic state beholden to no one. I think this is why King Charles favors the UN and the World Health Organization and NATO, because they're not governed under the laws that we have to be governed under. Certainly not the American people. With no rule of law considerations outside those that further deep state power, the deep state truly becomes God bestriding the earth. So they don't want you worshiping Jesus, they want you worshiping them. Then you have global corporatists and bankers, the exploitation of populations, unfettered by national protections and notions of personal morality and piety. The Democratic leadership and the Labor Party. The Democratic leftist leadership has become literally the counter-state enabler that executes, sustains, and protects cultural Marxist programs of action and facilitates the relentless expansion of the deep state. Surveillance state. And then you have the Republican leadership, or in the UK, the Conservatives, where they are more afraid of being accused of being called racist, sexist, homophobe, or Islamophobe than of failing to enforce not only their oaths, but also the law under the Constitution. The Republican establishment accepts and enforces cultural Marxist memes within its own sphere of operations. In doing so, knowingly or not, it becomes an agent of that. And then you have the Islamists who benefit. You probably have heard by now the term Red-Green Alliance, which is the Marxists and the Islamists coming together. And the reason why they ally with cultural Marxists because as far back as the 1980s, they properly assessed that the hard left has a strong chance of reducing Western civilization to its benefit. Islamists deploy these narratives to strategically blind and then control U.S. decision makers. This is by design and purposeful, quote unquote, by their own hands, has been the declared strategy of the Muslim Brotherhood since 1991. And for those that don't know, it really was UK intelligence who helped fund getting the Muslim Brotherhood up and running back in the day. This strategy seeks to divide American society against itself with the forced imposition of Islamist objectives on one half of American society by the other half. Once a society has been effectively atomized, the population will have lost its faith in the old order, detest those who reduced it, and divide along the lines of narrative adherence. This is the intended outcome of hostile information, political warfare campaigns, and today we see their effects on American society. Again, this was 10 years ago. We are watching all of this play out right now in the UK. At least here in the United States, we've kind of paused some of that with Donald Trump. It's still posing a threat, but at least we are recognizing it and not afraid to call it out. So let's go ahead and get inside the mind of these liberal progressives, which include the royals. Cultural Marxism relates to programs and activities that arise out of Gramsci Marxism, Fabian socialism, and most directly from the Frankfurt School. I just want to add here, Fabian socialism is what the Labor Party is driving on right now, but they're promoting it as democracy. The same thing with the democratic socialists that we have here in the United States. The Frankfurt strategy deconstructs societies through attacks on culture by imposing a dialectic that forces unresolvable contradictions under the rubric of critical theory. The result is induced nihilism, a belief in everything that is actually the belief in nothing. The postmodern diversity, multiculturalism narratives seek to implement cultural Marxist objectives can be demonstrated by reference to founding Frankfurt School theorist Herbert Marcuse's repurposing of the term tolerance. How many times do we hear the left talk about us being tolerant, especially when someone's head is about to be sawed off, right? In a 1965 paper, Marcuse defined tolerance as intolerance, said it can be implemented through undemocratic means to stop chauvinism, xenophobia, racism, discrimination, and should be extended to the left, while denied to the right. You see how that works? It is through such postmodern constructs that interoperable narratives are established among various left-wing groups, as well as between them and Islamist groups at all levels. For example, from the 2001 Conference of Foreign Ministers at Bamako, Mali, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, otherwise known as the OIC, declared its commitment to fight racism and xenophobia, and then declared Islamophobia a contemporary form of racism. As cultural Marxist narratives intensify, they are to be further operationalized in the form of hate speech narratives. Hate speech narratives are non-random, coordinated, and fully interoperable escalations of cultural Marxist memes. Key international players include the European Union, the UN, and the OSCE, and the OIC, and the International Muslim Brotherhood. Hate speech memes are structured, coordinated, and implemented through these same international forums. They involve close coordination with media and social media and include the countering violent extremism narratives. Now, the West has been totally captured by this shit. Case in point, when you look at the Labor Party, they are all pretty much Fabians, and these Fabian people are rooted with this ideology of eugenics. And I don't know if you know too much about this society, but these people are not very good people, in my opinion. You know, the Labor Party is very much a socialist party, but walking around like a wolf in sheep's clothing, pretending that they're trying to promote democracy and freedoms, but really they're promoting legit communism. They could easily be seen as the modern-day Nazi party.
I don't want to punish anybody, but there are an extraordinary number of people whom I want to kill. Not in any unkind or personal spirit, but it must be evident to all of you. You must all know half a dozen people at least who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. And I think it would be a good thing to make everybody come before a properly appointed board and say every 5 years or every 7 years, just put him there and say, sir or madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence? If you can't justify your existence, if you're not pulling your weight in the social vote, If you're not producing as much as you consume, or perhaps a little more, then clearly we cannot use the big organization of our society for the purpose of keeping you alive, because your life does not benefit us and it can't be of very much use.
This socialist, cultural, Marxist ideology, otherwise rebranded as globalism, has translated into modern day against Donald Trump. These attack narratives against Donald Trump are pervasive, full spectrum, and institutionalized at all levels. They operate in social media, television, the 24-hour news cycle in all media, and are entrenched at the upper levels of the bureaucracies and within the foreign policy establishment. They inform the entertainment industry, from late-night monologues like Jimmy Kimmel, to situation comedies, to television series, to movie themes. I mean, just look at Netflix. The effort required to direct this capacity at President Trump is a little more than a programming decision to do so. The cultural Marxist narrative is fully deployed, pervasive, full spectrum, and ongoing. Regarding the president, attacks have become a relentless 24/7 effort. While there's certainly a Marxist agenda and even Islamist motivations that must be seriously addressed in their own right, these motivations alone seem inadequate to explain the scope and magnitude of the effort directed against the president. The economic drivers behind the Marxist and Islamist ideologues are enormously influential and seek to leverage these ideological movements for their own self-interests. So the author goes on to say, while beyond the actual scope of this document, the benefactors of these political movements include urban real estate, who depend greatly on immigrant tenants, international banking, who seeks to maintain U.S. debtor status so as to control the application of American power, and elements of the business sector that depend upon immigrant labor or government infrastructure. The overall objective of these economic forces is the forced urbanization of the populace, thereby necessitating a larger, more powerful government. In summary, this is a form of population control by certain business cartels in league with cultural Marxists, corporatists, Islamists, who will leverage Islamic terrorism threats to justify the creation of a police state. Is it now making sense what they're doing? And the propaganda plays a huge role into this. Political warfare has been described as propaganda in a battle dress. The effort directed at President Trump is executed along one overt as well as two covert lines of effort. The overt line of effort is publicity. Publicity is the straightforward projection of a case that builds a picture in the audience's mind designed to garner support. It is facts without context and information the adversary wants the audience to possess that creates an impression and sets conditions. It seeks to establish goodwill and receptiveness to additional inputs. Back in the day when the BBC was reputable, that would be seen as the overt publicity. Now, there are two covert lines of effort. You've got propaganda and infiltration, subversion. Propaganda, and think about Harry and Meghan, how this applies to them, is the deliberate direction, even manipulation of information to secure a definite outcome. It is an attempt to direct the thinking of the recipient without his conscious collaboration into predetermined channels that are established in the publicity line of effort. It is the unwitting conditioning of the recipient by devious methods with an ulterior motive that seeks to move them incrementally over time into greater belief and acceptance of message transmitted in the publicity line of effort. That makes sense, right? And the royal family are participating in this so-called propaganda. Now, when we look at infiltration and subversion, they operate internal to the targeted organization in order to inform, target, coordinate, and amplify the effects of the publicity and propaganda. This is like the Sussex Squad. Both operate to gather intelligence, obstruct legitimate courses of action, provide inside information, and leak sensitive information that undermines leadership and suppresses the morale of friendly elements. Political warfare employs both publicity and propaganda. It recognizes no intrinsic virtue in the news, but rather envisions it as a mechanism to exploit and build up support. From a political warfare perspective, control of the news cycle is the most potent means of attracting and building up a favorable audience. As it relates to news cycle, publicity and propaganda can be merged to form a pseudo-publicity that is presented as news in furtherance of sustaining pseudo-realities maintained by cultural Marxist memes. Pseudo-publicity treatment of President Trump dominates the news cycle. The current campaign against President Trump operates in the following manner. The main narrative seeks to delegitimize President Trump, his administration, and the vision of America he projected as a candidate. With cultural Marxist memes serving as the backdrop, President Trump is to be relentlessly characterized as unfit through the use of supporting narratives, acting to move unwitting populations to the belief that President Trump is illegitimate, President Trump is corrupt, President Trump is dishonest. Then you have the supporting narratives, such as the ongoing series of Russia hacked the election, obstruction of justice, hiding collusion, Putin puppet. Again, treasonous, dishonest, corrupt, all of those words were being used. Then you have the backdrop narratives, the backdrop to the main narrative, which was Trump is illegitimate, corrupt, and so forth. Are cultural Marxist memes designed to sustain a general sense of loathing of President Trump and the America that elected him. Hence, President Trump is illegitimate. He was elected because of Russian hacking. And besides, he is a racist, sexist, xenophobe. Adversaries utilize these interlocking narratives as a defensive political and information warfare screen that silences critics and smears supporters of President Trump. When people in the media question the behavior, actions, and decisions of the Trump administration's opponents, they are immediately said to be working for the Russians or supporting Russian propaganda. Individual Americans who support the president are deemed deplorable and racist. The end state we find here, attacks on President Trump, are not just about destroying him, but also about destroying the vision of America that led to his election. Those individuals and groups seeking the destruction of President Trump actually seek to suffocate the vision of America that made him president. Hence, the end state is not just a delegitimized, destabilized, immobilized, and possibly destroyed presidency. So you're probably asking, what does that have to do with the Harry and Meghan saga? Well, it has everything to do with it. Now, I'm going to ask you to stay with me on this one and just think through it with me. What if the monarchy knew the attacks that they face were coming? What if they didn't just get blindsided by Harry and Meghan, but actually allowed it, or even quietly encouraged the conditions for it? What would the institution possibly gain from letting a media war be waged on itself? Stay with me. Think about this for a second. If the institution really was behind Harry coming over here and meddling in American affairs, it would explain a lot. Because uncontrolled free speech and social media is their single biggest problem right now. They can no longer dictate the narrative the way they used to. So, if they were using him as some kind of asset or pressure point on this side of the Atlantic, they'd have to go to extreme lengths to look completely disconnected, right? Any hint of direct involvement would instantly turn into a diplomatic crisis and get framed as foreign interference. Basically, an act of war in today's climate. There is no way they could ever credibly claim they didn't know what was happening. And yet, the more you look at this, the harder it becomes to believe they're not still pulling some of those strings behind the scenes. I pointed this out before, and so have plenty others. Harry and Meghan are still listed on the official royal website. Harry is still Counselor of State. There has never been any official documentation stripping him of his ability to represent the crown here in the United States. Despite all the secrecy around his visa situation, nothing has ever been released to show he's operating completely independently of the institution. It's all very convenient if you're trying to maintain plausible deniability while still keeping one foot in the door. This is the half in, half out that they've asked for. They had it the whole entire time. Now, if we strip away the emotion and look at this the way the old political warfare executive used to think, a controlled, self-inflicted crisis is one of the highest level plays in the intelligence books. In intelligence circles, they call it strategic inoculation or controlled demolition. For an ancient institution like the monarchy, what they internally call the so-called firm, letting this happen could deliver long-term payoffs. So stay with me. Let me break this down. First, the principle of strategic inoculation. We know in medicine, you inject a weakened version of a virus so the body builds immunity against the real thing. In political warfare, you do the same thing with narratives. You also do the same thing or what they were trying to do with inoculating the public on mis and disinformation during COVID, remember? Like when you really sit down and think about this, the monarchy's real existential threat has never been this D-list Hollywood nobody or this interview with Oprah. The threat is the long-term public apathy, post-colonial guilt, and the Republican movement waiting for the right moment to abolish the crown. By allowing the entire media storm to center on bitter family drama, celebrity nonsense, and easily disproven claims like the secret backyard wedding, they completely changed the conversation. You do realize that, right? Instead of people asking, should we get rid of the monarchy? Or, why should we continue to keep paying for the monarchy? Everyone was suddenly arguing about whose side they were on in a soap opera. The opposition got lured into fighting over gossip instead of constitutional reform. That's not a loss. This was classic diversion. Secondly, you also think about the intelligence win that nobody seems to connect here. The network. By sitting back and watching this massive, high-profile assault unfold, the palace's security and communications people got to see exactly who their enemies were, which media empires, which Silicon Valley streamers, which politicians and commentators would happily weaponize race and post-colonial guilt against the British state. They mapped the entire adversarial ecosystem in real time. That kind of intelligence is priceless for the next information war. Right? And then when you look at the absurdity, what if Harry and Meghan were playing controlled opposition for the crown this whole entire time? When you look at Meghan, everything about Meghan Markle's behavior has been murky, hypocritical, and deliberately gaslighting from the start. And Harry enabling it, writing spare, full of contradictions that don't stand up to 5 minutes of scrutiny. The Air New Zealand first-class flight that never existed, remember that? The timeline errors around Queen Mother's death? Claiming an Xbox years before the damn thing was even released? Remember? These aren't small mistakes. They're the kind of obvious, easily disproven lies that make intelligence analysts wonder if someone is deliberately sabotaging their own narrative from the inside. Think about how many resources and advisors that they have at their disposal. You can't fail this bad. Now, if we are looking at this from the perspective of this being psychological warfare, which I firmly believe it is, considering all the tactics that they've been using on this community and the mis and disinformation that they're purposely putting out there where nothing makes any kind of sense, Harry and Meghan could be seen as classic chaos agents. The goal isn't to defend the monarchy openly, right? It is to capture the leadership of the anti-monarchy movement that somehow they're using for political purposes. Case in point, the Sussex Squad are cultural Marxists. Why haven't the royal family done anything about them? They easily have access to MI5 and MI6, but yet they're still lurking online, harassing and threatening people. And they do it in 3 ways. First, you have the inoculation via the factual sabotage. You want to kill serious accusations of institutional racism or cruelty? You deliberately mix in obvious, provable lies. The fake backyard wedding, the non-existent flight. When those collapse in public, people naturally start doubting the entire package, which this is where we're at right now. We completely don't believe anything that comes out of this couple's mouth, which after what Harry and Meghan have done, the royal family actually has come out on top. So when you trivialize the real threats, a genuine Republican movement would attack the monarchy on constitutional power, taxpayer money, and democratic accountability. Instead, what has the public seen? They've got flooded with petty personal grievances like, will Meghan go or not? Will they bring the kids? It's been nonstop drama. The entire anti-palace argument got dragged down into lowbrow celebrity gossip. Serious political people couldn't touch it without looking like they were participating in this reality TV show. In addition to the petty drama and noise, Harry and Meghan were able to do this covert work on the down low without very much scrutiny because everybody was so focused on, the ridiculousness of everything that this couple had been doing. And thirdly, you exhaust the public with constant gaslighting and cognitive fatigue. I always say Harkle fatigue is real. Stories shift, claims get walked back from racist to unconscious bias, contradictions pile up. Eventually, the audience just tunes out, exhausted and cynical. The critics lose cultural relevance. Yeah, we've seen quite a few Marxists who used to be strong supporters of Harry and Meghan no longer talking about them. So now when you take a moment and you step back and look at this whole saga from a 30,000-foot view, Harry and Meghan's attacks on the monarchy really didn't do very much in the sense of toppling it or denting its reputation. I could argue and say that because of it, it's made the royals more popular. Because when Meghan accused the royal family of being racist with her little stupid story, obviously people took sides. The royalists supported and backed the Queen, backed Prince William, backed Princess Catherine, and at the time, Prince Charles. Nobody believed that this family was racist, and people came to the defense of the royal family. At the same time, Harry and Meghan were still allowed to continue on with their cultural Marxist bullshit to subvert the United States of America. And what did I tell you was going to happen when Donald Trump got into office? We were going to start to see Harry making his way back to the UK. Didn't I tell you that Harry and Meghan were going to be now focused internationally? The causes they were going to support either were in California, where they knew that they could possibly siphon taxpayer money, or it was going to be internationally through international bodies. Now what are we seeing? We're seeing Harry and Meghan working with the World Health Organization, aligning with UK government initiatives. All to make it look like, they're still, independent and forging their own way when it's becoming abundantly clear that they have been assets this whole entire time. And I stand by that feeling. After everything that we have looked at, you can't possibly say that, this drama that's constant, nonstop, and fatiguing is real. You notice how quickly the Archwell-Fugazi Public Charity wiped its website the moment all of that fraud was being exposed last year, and then the announcement of James Holt running back to the UK to hide? In addition, look how quickly Harry and Meghan pivoted once it was exposed that the Biden administration had been censoring Americans. All of a sudden now everybody in that complex is so concerned and focused on reducing harms for children. They didn't just think about that on their own. This is lockstep with what the UK is doing, what Australia is doing, what Canada is doing, what the EU is doing. Now, of all the things that Harry and Meghan have worked on over the last 6 years, the one thing that they never strayed away with and were consistent on was this censorship. So could it be that everything else was deliberately sabotaged because it really wasn't serious in the first place? I'm somehow getting that vibe. Now, if Harry and Meghan are covert assets over here in the United States and have the backing of the UK government, then that would explain how they're able to pump out so much propaganda consistently for the past 10 years. There's no way that this couple could have done this by themselves. There's absolutely no way. I have to take a moment and give a shout out to Lauren the Insider for touching this topic and backing the work that I have been doing these past 5 years. I am so glad there is another creator who is looking outside the narratives we have been fed and actively challenging it. I mean, it really does mean a lot to get this kind of support. If you don't know who Lauren is, definitely go check her channel out, as she has been bringing some heat to the conversation, and I am so here for it.
Andy Burnham, I just want to ask you on behalf of survivors of the grooming gangs, do you think you've done enough? Let me tell you, on behalf of children that were raped and failed, you haven't done enough, and that is why people are backing Restore. Thank you, Andy Burnham. Over to you in the studio, Dan.
Definitely go check her channel out. I'll link that video below in my description box. But what do you guys think? I do believe that we really do need to look at this a bit differently, because the headlines that are coming in now about Harry going back to the UK, and there's talks of King Charles wanting to reconcile, and what does that mean for the extended family? You see, I'm telling you, it's only a matter of time before we start seeing those headlines about Harry and Prince William trying to mend fences for their father, because that's his dying wish. Wait for it, it's coming. They've already started to seed that question. Will Harry see his extended family, meaning William and Catherine? Whatever, just don't fall for it. And as of now, they say Meghan's going back with the kids. I bet you by the time next month rolls around, Meghan's not going to be going back. And there aren't going to be any kids going to see King Charles or Grandpa. It's also ridiculous, but I guess they have to figure out how they're going to get out of this one. So, continue to keep stringing the public along until the narrative fits and sticks. And by that time, everything has been swept under the rug. I think in their minds, 5 years ago when they came over here, I think the whole idea was, well, by this point, they would have had control of the internet. Well, they didn't anticipate Elon Musk throwing a whole wrench in all of those plans and allowing free speech to live on the platform. So, now it's a totally different ballgame. And, we're just going to have to wait and see how this all plays out. But I think it's pretty predictable. Anyhow, what do you guys think? Definitely let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.